Howdy, class. Welcome to part two. We're going to cover some modeling basics just to kind of get you started on this first assignment. But before we even talk about modeling, let's talk about some organization because as you can see right here in the outline, I already have some stuff in here. And when you start modeling, you're going to have a bunch of objects and your outliner is going to get crazy full. So let's talk about some organization ways. If you're very familiar with like the folder systems on your computer, we have a similar version of that, how we can contain all of our objects in these folders called groups. And so right here, I have my first group. Right now, this is grayed out because I have it hidden. So to hide or unhide, you hit H. And so this group has appeared, and if something is visible, it's going to be this bright white in the outliner if I want to hide it. You have to make sure that you're selected on the group. So you've got to select it, hit hide. Perfect. And so in these groups, I'm going to unhide it and then expand here. Now you can see a bunch of stuff right here. And these are all these different objects that I have put in a group. And I'll show you how to make a group right now. And so right now I'm going to hide this. And so if I ever wanted to make a group, I'm going to hit create an object in our scene, hit W to start translating. If you hold down the shift key and you see that how it says clone there, if you move or translate your object, you create another duplicate. So that's a quick way to start making some clones or duplicates, more objects in your scene. So right now I have a group of these lovely little spheres. And so um, let's even add a cube in here. So we have a lovely cube. If you want to put these in a group, you can either select, drag over in the viewport. That lets you multiple select objects. Or if I just click out here, that deselects. Or I can go in the outliner, select one of the objects, go all the way down here, hold down Shift, select again. That is another way to select our objects. And then I'm just going to go up here to Edit and hit Group. Now these are all put in a group. Don't worry too much that this little locator has moved down at the bottom. That is actually the pivot point of the group, and I can show what that means in a second. So right now, everything has been grouped. So if I select one of these pieces, the whole group isn't fully highlighted. So I'm going to expand this so you see what's going on. So we have one sphere versus when I select another sphere. But if I want to select the whole group, there's a couple of different ways. Like as you're going to learn, there's a lot of different ways to do the same thing in Maya. I can go back into Outliner, select the group, and then I can move everything as a whole. And so that's a really great way to approach this. And that's how you can contain and move spheres. Now, if you want anything to be out of a group, you can always hit the group and then say edit ungroup, but that's going to ungroup everything. And so now everything is back together versus if I select them all again, hit edit group, you can move an individual piece out of this group. So if I go here and just select this little sphere, middle mouse click and drag out. Now that sphere is out of this group. So if I try to move it, it's going to stay in its own position. And so that's one way to approach this. Right now, you see our pivot point is down here at the bottom. I'm just going to go in, delete that for right now. You can edit the pivot point. And so why does this really matter? Mostly when we're doing rotation and scaling, because you're going to be editing this from a particular pivot point. So I'm going to hit Control Z. And then now I'm going to show how we can edit any pivot point. Just hold down D. You're going to see the gizmo changed. And now you can translate and move that rotation in here. And so if I go back to E, now you see we're rotating from a different fixed point. And so a little bit of housekeeping, how we're going to play with groups. All right, let's talk about this group that I've already created. So right now I unhid it. I'm going to hit F to focus in. Notice we don't focus in on the group because our pivot point is here. That's because it's treating the pivot point as like part of this group. So if I hold down D again, I can maneuver. So right now, I just click the wrong object. I'm not sure what's going on. So to get back to that group, I just have to select here, hold D, and now I'm going to move that pivot point to a more centralized location. So Um, I'm selecting off to get out of that mode, click back in. If I hit F, we're still not going to focus in on that. But at least now if we move the group as a whole, it's going to be a little bit better. So what I did in this case is I just select and then focus in versus focus in here. There must be some kind of extra information in here. So let me try something really quick. We go to edit and delete by type history. Now let's hit focus. Okay, that did a little bit of something, but not quite what I wanted to do in here. Now let's talk about what I have going on in here. So if you remember when we were discussing this before about different kinds of shaders. So we're really not going to get into shading so much yet, but I do want to talk about how the shading is going to affect what your sphere looks like. And so in this case right now, we have a Lambert. I'm going to make, and the way you can adjust and add a Lambert into that scene, I hit the wrong key right there, is make sure you select your object, right click. Now this brings up a menu you're going to use a lot. So right now we're in object mode, edge mode, and we'll talk about this in a second. But I'm going to scroll all the way down here and go to, you could either assign, create a new favorite, or an existing material. I already have made these prior, but I'll show you how to make them. Let's click on Lambert 1. And so that is Lambert 1. You see how that changes? That is a default appearance of this Lambert shader. And so there's a lot of different ways to approach this. You go right here in the attribute editor. Just for simplicity's sake, you can adjust even the color of it. I'm going to bring it back to a closer gray so you can compare and contrast between these two. So default in your scene, everything's going to be Lambert. Now, if you're going to be having these smooth shapes, I recommend using a blend and a Phong. If you've already seen right here, I already named these. To name or rename anything, just double click on this item and then you can say blend, let's say example, and then hit enter. You've done naming this in here. And so right now I'm going to double check. These look very similar, so I don't know if the exact blend has been added to this. So I'm going to right click on top of that. Existing material, let's add blend. Now you see that's changed a little bit, but if we compare and contrast, we get this nice little specular highlight, which we really don't see here in the Lambert as a default. And then lastly, I'm going to show you what the Phong shader looks like. If you're doing this brand new, you're going to go here to add new material. And I will scroll up here to Maya because these are default. And let's do Maya Phong. Now we have our Maya Phong shader that's in here. So usually, just at a quick glance of the differences between, just so you can see this a little bit better, I'm just selecting those and hiding them. So we can focus on these three right here. There's a large difference between what Lambert looks like in the scene versus a blend or a Phong. Some of the things you can see here with the blend is you see a little bit more of the striations when we have these edge loops versus the Phong shader hides that a bit more. It's a little bit darker, more intense of a specular, and these edges and contours. So stuff to consider. Blend and Phong is going to look a lot better default in your scene. So I'm going to select all these and unhide them again. So a great example of what these are going to look like, let's say on a different type of shape, like a cube. So if I go back, I'm going to add the Phong to this, and then existing, go back to that Phong. So all of these are representative of the same shaders here. We don't see much of a difference at all between those three in there. So, and I'll make sure this Maya file is accessible for students. So y'all can go into the scene and look around as well. But you see, we don't get those specular highlights nearly as much as we get these. All right, let's talk about these spheres in the corner. What is going on, Professor Bunock? First thing I would like to show you is I'm selecting this. These are technically cubes, and I'm going to show you what is going on here. So I'm multi-selecting these. And if you heard me in class, I talked about a smooth versus hard mode. I have put these in smooth mode. And so if I hit 1, we're in hard mode, default mode, versus if I select 3, these are smooth modes. So basically what this does is this creates a smooth or interpolated average edge based off of your actual geometry. So You can have these hard edge cubes, and if you want them to look like spears, that is what you can do. But I'm going to do a really quick example of, let's say, I'm going to edit mesh. No, let's go here to mesh, and let's see here. Let's do smooth. And so that makes it a lovely circle, which is not exactly what we want to do. I just want to add some more edge loops in here in a really quick manner. So let's retop. Here we go. Here, apply. Yes, ignore and continue. All right. Retop is very weird in this case. I'm gonna make sure I add an existing material. Let's put that blend back on here. Um, okay, so maybe that wasn't going to be a great example. Forget everything I said. So I just want to show those are examples of how to put something in a smooth versus hard mode. So right now I'm just going to hit Control Z to bring all that back. And then this row right here, these are actually, so let's hear 1, 2, 3. Oh, these were spears that I already had made prior. So as you can tell, verses 1, 3, 1, 3. If it's already a spear, it's going to be super smooth anyways. Versus these are examples of the cubes that have already been smooth. And you can tell that these were originally cubes based off of this edge loop here. We have a pole right here. And so that's not ideal. While everything is in quads, this can create some rendering artifacts. And so it's a couple examples I wanted to show you. Go back to this group. I'm going to hide it and minimize it. All right, let's talk about extrusion. So I'm going to unhide this group and hit F to focus. Okay, so I already did a couple of examples in here, but I'm going to show you what is going on here. So I'm going to hit W, hold down Shift, drag. I'm going to make a clone. So what I did right here, and I'm going to select these so you can see the edge loops, is I already started extruding to show you how you can use this to start modeling. So I'm going to, and another way to kind of view this is making sure we're in wireframe mode. So that is in wireframe mode, and then you also want to make sure you're in smooth mode. So when you deselect afterwards, if you click this little box right here, this is wireframe on shaded. So that way you can see the wireframe even in smooth mode. So let's talk about edge loops. I'm going to hit F to focus in. My recommendation is if you're doing extrusions, use it by face. So let's right click. Right now we're in object mode. We want to be in face mode. So let's select faces. I'm going to select that face. And if you're already in poly modeling, you're just going to need to go to this and hit this button. Now we're using the extrusion tool. And so how the extrusion tool works is I just grab and drag. Woohoo! So there we go. That being said, once you release, you can still go in and edit. As soon as you step off, or let's say click off, the extrusion tool is done. And so if I want to, let's say, keep extruding, I could even extrude here, select that face, extrude, go out, and I could even, let's say, bend it or even rotate, even scale up. So there's a lot of different ways of how to approach that extrusion tool. And so here's an example of how I approach that. And then this one is an example. I'm right-clicking, going back to object mode. I already added edge loops. So if you go into here to mesh tools, insert edge loop tool. And so what you have to do to get this tool to work is you have to make sure you select on top of an edge. And so right here, I selected on this edge, it's creating a vertical edge here versus if this is already a vertical inclined edge, if I select here, it's going to create a horizontal edge. Now, you could keep making infinite if you click on another edge, it'll continue making an edge versus if you do not click on an edge, you click somewhere else, it'll get rid of edge mode, or when in doubt, hit Q to quit whatever you're working on. And so using that to create edges, on this example, I grab some of those faces. So you can also grab multiple faces. So if I go here back to the face, you could sit here, hold down Shift, and then make sure you hold Shift before you select, and that's how you can select more edges. You can extrude out, and that's what I did here. But I want to show you a couple of tricks where if we're on the inside of the model, so not near exteriors, if you double click, you can select everything versus I've done a couple of tricks in here where let's say I hold down shift, select another one, and then select a middle piece. It'll start selecting everything along that line because it's auto registering. You're trying to select a group in there. And so you can go in here and hit extrude again. And this will be confusing, but I want to show it. It's going to be extruding out as a whole. So if I hold this arrow key, it brings everything out. Um, and then there's even ways, let's say you want to keep everything pretty more uniform. That is another reason to approach that using the scale tool. If I hit Q to quit, we are done, but we're still in face mode. Now I'm going to go back to object mode. It's not very pretty. There's a lot of stuff in here that's a little off asymmetrically. I'm going to hit right click and go to vertex mode, and then you can select a vertex and even manipulate that in here. So that's how you can kind of eyeball things, help make it less wonky in that kind of aspect. And so that's another way to approach modeling in that realm. And so there's a lot of things you can do in here to create these very unique shapes. And so that is another way to approach this. Lastly, let's look at these back figures in here. This is an example of taking this model here and beveling the edges. So I'm going to show a great example here. Hold down Shift, but make sure I'm in translate mode. And then if I go down to, I believe, yeah, edit mesh, and then you're going to go to bevel. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this. If you just hit bevel, it's going to bevel every single edge. And then there's also the crease tool. And so I'm going to hit Q to make sure we're out of that mode. With this example, I'm holding down Command to translate around. Now, if you're playing with subdivision levels, you can also use the crease tool, which I did at this layer and this layer. It's kind of why there's a thicker line in here. But if I go in and this, I just double clicked on here, so it selected that entire row of edges, and then I will go here to the crease tool. Now you're gonna get this, it says select components to crease, then you're gonna drag your middle mouse click. And so by going up and down, you see how that highlight kind of changes a little bit. Now that has been creased right there. And so that's another way to kind of retain sharpness. That being said, the crease tool in this essence only works in Maya versus if you're going to beveling something and export a object out as an OBJ or FBX, it'll retain that. The crease will not be retained unless because it's Maya specific to that software. All right, let's hide this group and go to our next group. So as you're starting your first object, like here's a great example. I'm rotating around this area, but there's nothing here. Hit F to focus in. These are all the basic shapes that'll show up in Maya. So the sphere, cube. This is a cylinder, as you can tell, kind of a little weird in there. But when you, let's say, do create polygon cylinder, if you go to this little tab here, you can adjust how many divisions are in here. So let's say I'm just going to increase a lot and hit apply. Now we get a much smoother cylindrical shape in here. And so that is an example of that. We have a cone. I recommend to stay away from the cone because you see how so much of this comes to the tip here. It is a pain to try to get rid of, so I just recommend never messing with the cone. Torus will be pretty helpful. You can even get a 2D plane. For steampunk, when we had steampunk, the gear is pretty popular. We got a helix, soccer ball, pyramid, and then this little guy. This is a pipe, as well as another geometrical shape. And all of these can be found here if you go to Create Polygon Primitives, and you have our lovely selections in here. So I wanted to show you what you already have in here as a default. I'm going to hide this group. And lastly, let's talk about Booleans. So we already talked a little bit about this in the lecture. This is a demo of one that I've already Booleaned, and I'll show you how to go through that in a second. But you see how it's cutting that shape out? That is because I used the difference tool. So, and it's still in live Boolean mode, so it'll be still cutting out because it is not, I have not told it to stop yet. So Let's talk about how we can Boolean these two. So I believe it's if we go to, here we go, mesh Booleans, you have a bunch of different options in here. So the one I used was difference, A minus B. I select that. We're doing the same thing we saw over here. Now we can go here in the menu and kind of play with all the different options. If I want to show union, this is what that would look like with these two versus difference. That cube is cutting into the sphere this time. Um, Intersection, that is kind of what it is. It's creating what is in the middle. And then a couple of other ones that are going to be helpful. There's hole punch, which is the same as difference, but instead of creating geometry here, it is going to be a giant gaping hole. Surprisingly enough, we actually have a fill hole option that's in here as well. Um, let's go back and cut out. There we go. So that one just cuts out like a hole punch. These are just like the leftovers of a hole punch. And so those are a lot of the basics of modeling in here. You're going to see anything that's left over from that Boolean is separated as its own unique mesh. So gets a little interesting, gets a little complicated. It's kind of why I've been advising against Booleans until you get a little more familiar with Maya. Couple of things I want to talk about is, well, we talked about groups, but let's talk about combining and separating. So if you go here to mesh, these two are separate pieces. But if I hold down, shift, and select another piece, and go to mesh, combine, it's going to treat both of these as the same mesh, but we're still going to have that really ugly intersection in there. But it's going to treat it all as one object here in the outliner. But how do we fix something? And I'm going to show a better example of this. Let me bring in this cube, move it over here to the side. I'm going to select the cube with the spheres, edit, combine. It's treating it all as one object. But that topology, ooh, we're gonna have to do a couple of different things. But let's say I don't want them combined. You can just hit edit and separate. Now they're all separate pieces, but it puts everything together in this little group, which is quite interesting. But if I select the group again and do mesh combine, they're all back together. This is where we can play with the newer versions of Maya. I think it's 2024 and 5 forward have these new options. If you do what remesh is what I recommend most if you're doing 3D printing because it kind of triangulates. It's not quite the best. I'm going to hit undo, mesh. I'm going to go back to remesh. If you go in here, you don't have a whole lot of options unless you hit custom. Even then, it's not really great. What I recommend is you can use retopologize. So you're redoing the topology. You can even hit keep original. If you have a target of the amount of faces as well as where you want to do, so you can preserve hard edges or make it symmetrical. Those are some really great examples. So I'm going to show you what it is when you don't and do preserve hard edges. So without hard edges, I'm going to hit apply, ignore and continue. It's not that great. Versus if we do preserve hard edges, apply, continue, ignore, it still doesn't create us really nice topology. But it looks cleaner overall, still not great. Now I'm going to show you my method that I often use when I'm trying to readjust some 3D prints is I start with remesh. Okay, still not great. I don't think it's separated. That is why. So I'm going to hit undo. Make sure everything is selected. Combine. Delete. It's because we had that extra in there. And so let's show a great example. I'm going to start over from scratch. So here, I'm going to select these two, mesh, combine. What I like to do in this case is go to mesh, remesh first, looks atrocious, but then retopologize, because that's already here, but just so the sake it's less confusing, go back here and retop, ignore and continue. It's still very similar to what we had before, but we have a little bit cleaner of geometry in here. Um, Sometimes what I like to do is now that we have something a little bit cleaner, say I hit smooth in here. Makes things a little bit easier. Edit, remesh. In this case, it's just adding more to it. So what I am going to do to help, remeshing is actually way better in ZBrush, which we'll talk about later. Let's see, let's not tessellate borders. Now we get something a little bit simpler. It takes a lot of playing around when we are trying to auto retop our objects. And now you can see why we are sticklers for having really clean topology. But once you get the hang of what you're going to be doing in Maya, there's a whole lot you can do in here. And so let's say I wanted to make like a keyhole or something. So I'm gonna, if I click here, and then right now it seems to think I want to extrude. That is not what I want to do. And so what I can do here, let's say if I just select a few of these and I'm holding down Shift, hit extrude, um, and then you see how it's extruding out. It's because it's on a curved surface. A quick way to kind of fix that is to use the scaling tool. And so that's another way to kind of approach this. But if I wanted to quickly just make a little key, like a key to go into a door, then I would say my next step is to insert edge loop. Insert that edge loop here, hit quit, go back into face mode, select these faces, hit extrude, ta-da, go back, and then you can kind of see where I'm going with it. And so if I go back to hit quit, a cube to quit, mesh tools, insert edge loop to get that kind of like forked-like appearance in here. Hit Q to quit, go back to face mode, so on and so on. And then extrude uno mas one more time. All right, so now we kind of have the semblance of what a key looks like. And then there's ways to go in and make and fix these. But those are kind of the basics of how to model to get you started. We'll talk about more stuff next week. But hopefully this was really helpful and get to cracking on those prototypes.